Imagine for a second that, well, that you are a staunch, highly decorated, Ivy League-educated atheist.
Right.
You are a mathematician, and that means your entire reality, your whole way of navigating the world is built on hard empirical data. It's built on logical proofs and, undeniable physical laws.
Very rigid structure.
Exactly. And then someone hands you an ancient religious text. So naturally, you open it expecting to find, I don't know, myths, fables, just unscientific fairy tales.
You expect an easy win.
You expect a very easy intellectual victory. But instead, as you read, you find the book actively arguing back with you. Like, it actually anticipates your specific skeptical objections.
Which is a terrifying experience for an academic.
Oh, absolutely. It meticulously corners you into this flawless logical trilemma that you literally cannot mathematically escape.
Yeah.
And today, we are exploring a massive, unprecedented demographic shift where exactly that scenario is playing out over and over again. So, welcome to another deep dive.
It is great to be here to unpack this.
Our mission today is to explore a profound transformation happening right now in global religious demographics. Specifically, the massive, rapidly accelerating wave of conversions to Islam in the West.
And it is accelerating at a truly fascinating pace.
But we aren't just going to throw dry statistics at you today. We are looking directly at the people. We are going to highlight the exact names of prominent individuals who made this transition.
Right.
And crucially, we're going to look at the exact words, the specific Quranic verses that completely shattered their previous worldviews.
It is a truly fascinating intersection of ancient textual tradition and modern human psychology. The primary source material we are working with today is a comprehensive report titled Quranic Verses and Revert Testimonies.
Yeah, that report is incredibly detailed.
It really is. This research allows us to basically look under the hood of these deeply personal transitions. We will be examining the highly specific theological appeals that are currently drawing in, well, highly analytical minds.
Not to mention the sprawling digital infrastructure that supports this entire movement today.
Exactly. And the very real, often highly debated sociocultural realities of what actually happens after someone takes the leap.
Okay, let's unpack this. I am so ready to get into the actual verses, but before we do, we need to set the stage. Because the sheer scale of what is happening here, the sheer demographic momentum is staggering.
It really is.
And honestly, I think a lot of people are completely unaware of it.
The numbers are undeniably significant.
Yeah.
To give you a sense of the scale, according to the data in the report, in the United States alone, an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 individuals are transitioning to Islam every single year.
Wow. 30,000 a year.
Yes. And when you compound that over time, it means converts now make up nearly a quarter of the entire U.S. Muslim population.
Wait, really? A quarter?
Almost a quarter, yes. I mean, this isn't just organic population growth through birth rates, right? This is a massive, active influx of entirely new adherents.
A quarter of the population? I mean, that is not a fringe movement. That is a foundational demographic shift. And the report shows it is not just an American phenomenon, right? Like, this is everywhere.
Absolutely not. The trajectory is mirrored globally. In the United Kingdom, researchers are seeing approximately 5,000 to 6,000 conversions annually.
Okay.
And what is particularly notable in the UK data is that this demographic is predominantly women.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It is. And if we zoom out over the last decade, both the UK and France have recorded upwards of 100,000 new converts each. Germany is reporting up to 4,000 new adherents annually.
That's massive.
And moving beyond the West, the text highlights fascinating movements like the Balik Islam phenomenon in the Philippines. They recorded roughly 220,000 religious transitions in the year 2011 alone.
220,000 in 1 year. That is just mind-blowing. But, what I found incredibly compelling when reading through the source material wasn't just the statistics. It was the specific language used by the community to describe this shift. Because if you listen to the people actually making this transition, you very rarely hear the word conversion.
Exactly.
There is a very distinct, very deliberate semantic shift to the word reversion. Like, everyone calls themselves a revert.
That semantic distinction is actually the critical starting point for our entire deep dive today. To truly understand the psychological pull of this movement, we really have to understand a foundational Islamic theological concept known as Fitrah.
Okay, Fitrah, walk us through that.
So, Fitrah posits that every single human being is born with an innate, natural, completely uncorrupted inclination toward monotheism. It essentially argues that there is a baseline, factory-installed recognition of a single creator within the human psyche.
Okay, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Isn't that just like a clever marketing rebrand? I mean, pretty much every religion on earth claims to be the natural state of humanity, right? Or the default truth. What makes this specific framing of Fitrah so uniquely effective for the people in these studies?
It's an excellent question. The difference lies in how Fitrah diagnoses disbelief. The theology suggests that it is only through external societal conditioning or family upbringing or cultural immersion that an individual is led away from this natural baseline.
Oh, I see.
Right. A child adopts polytheism or atheism or secular materialism entirely because of their environment. Therefore, when someone adopts Islam later in life, the theological framework absolutely refuses to view it as them joining something brand new, foreign, or alien.
Interesting.
It views the process as the individual meticulously stripping away the accumulated layers of societal conditioning and returning to their original unconditioned spiritual baseline. They are, quite literally, reverting to who they intrinsically always were.
So if I'm trying to visualize this, it's less like installing a brand new, totally foreign operating system on your phone,
Right.
where everything looks different, the interface is weird, and you have to learn a bunch of new gestures just to make a call.
Yeah.
Instead, it's more like performing a factory reset to get back to the original code. Like the clean code that was always there, just buried under years of buggy downloaded apps, cached data, and societal junk files.
That is a highly accurate and, frankly, very useful analogy. And if we look at the psychological implications of that factory reset, it becomes incredibly clear why it's so potent.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Think about what that framing means for the individual who is standing on the precipice of a massive life change. The psychological framing of returning home to your natural, pure state is infinitely more comforting and powerful than the framing of abandoning your entire past to join a foreign outgroup.
That makes so much sense.
It fundamentally removes the immense friction of adopting an alien identity. Instead, the transition is framed as an awakening to your true, unburdened self.
I want you, the listener, right now, to just consider how powerful that psychological framing is. If you are exhausted, if you are just searching for meaning, being told that you don't have to become someone else, that you don't have to put on a new mask, but rather just take off the masks you've been forced to wear, that is an incredibly potent invitation.
It truly is.
But it immediately begs the question, what actually triggers this factory reset? If people are deeply buried under decades of secular, atheist, or different religious conditioning, what is the catalyst that cuts through all that accumulated noise?
Well, according to the testimonies in the report, the primary catalyst, unequivocally, is the text of the Quran itself. But how it operates is what surprises most people.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
When you analyze the narratives of individuals who transition, especially those coming from backgrounds of staunch atheism, agnosticism, or secular humanism, they very rarely describe the initial process as a warm, fuzzy, purely emotional leap of faith.
Right.
They describe it as an intense, almost combative intellectual confrontation. The text systematically deconstructs their existing paradigms.
And this is where we get into the exact names of the exact verses, which is just incredible to read. Let's look closely at how the text actively deconstructs the atheist paradigm. Because the sources highlight some absolutely brilliant minds who were basically stopped dead in their tracks by very specific philosophical arguments.
Let's start with Dr. Jeffrey Lang. He is an associate professor of mathematics at the University of Kansas. And to understand his reaction to the text, you really have to understand his background.
Set the scene for us.
Dr. Lang was raised in a very strict Catholic environment in Connecticut. However, by the age of 18, he had completely and totally rebelled against organized religion. He became a staunch, committed atheist.
Okay, so he's completely out.
Entirely.
Yeah.
And this worldview was heavily driven by his inability to reconcile the concept of a loving God with the profound reality of human suffering, what philosophers call the problem of evil.
Right, so we have a mathematician, a mind entirely built around logic, rigorous proofs, and empirical observable data. And he eventually gets handed a translated copy of the Quran by some Muslim students he interacts with.
That's right.
Now, you would expect a math professor in his position to just, roll his eyes, flip through a few pages, and dismiss an ancient religious text as outdated mythology.
But he didn't dismiss it. And what's fascinating here is the specific reason he couldn't dismiss it. It is because of how the text addressed him as a reader.
How so?
Dr. Lang noted in his testimony that the text didn't ask him to bypass his rational, critical mind. Rather, it aggressively demanded that he use it. He described this surreal feeling where he felt like the author of the text was actively anticipating his specific, highly educated, skeptical objections.
Wow.
It was engaging him in a direct psychological dialogue.
The idea that an ancient text actually argues with you is just wild.
Yeah.
And the specific verses that seem to act as the ultimate intellectual sledgehammer for former atheists like Dr. Lang are found in a chapter called Surah At-Tur.
Yes.
Specifically, we are looking at verses 35 and 36. And the English translation of these verses reads, "Or were they created by nothing, or were they the creators of themselves, or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, they are not certain."
What is happening in those two verses is a brilliant deployment of formal logic. The text presents what philosophers and logicians call a strict trilemma regarding the origins of human existence.
A trilemma.
It takes the empiricist, the materialist, and deliberately boxes them into a logical corner with only three possible options to explain reality. Option 1. Humanity and the universe appeared from absolute, total nothingness without any prior cause.
Okay, that's one.
Option 2. Humanity and the universe somehow created themselves. Or option 3. There exists an external, uncaused creator.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's slow down and really unpack this trilemma, because this is the exact moment where the math professor's brain gets permanently engaged. Look at option 1. Created from absolute nothing.
Right.
In modern physics, in mathematics, in any hard science, really, something cannot come from absolute nothing. It violates the most fundamental foundational laws of causality and thermodynamics.
Correct. The empirical, scientific mind must instantly reject option 1. Absolute nothingness has no properties, no potential, and no mechanisms to produce something. So we move to option 2, self-creation.
Right.
The verses ask, were they the creators of themselves? Logically, for any entity or universe to create itself, it would have to simultaneously exist and not exist at the exact same moment.
Which hurts my brain just thinking about it.
Because it would have to exist before it existed to perform the act of creation, which is an absurd, impossible paradox. You cannot be both the creator and the created entity simultaneously.
Which leaves the atheist materialist worldview incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because if the observable universe didn't pop into existence from absolute nothing, and it logically couldn't have created itself, you're mathematically and philosophically left with the necessary existence of an external uncaused cause.
Exactly.
And what's fascinating is that Dr. Lang isn't an isolated case here. The sources detail several highly educated professionals who hit this exact same wall. Let's talk about Dr. Laurence B. Brown.
Yes. Dr. Brown is another highly illustrative case study. He is an Ivy League-educated ophthalmic surgeon, a former officer in the United States Air Force, and also a former committed atheist.
Quite the resume.
Very much so. But his entry point into religious inquiry wasn't initially academic. It was a severe, traumatic medical crisis with his newborn daughter.
Oh, wow.
In a moment of sheer desperation, he found himself spontaneously bargaining with the concept of God in the hospital. And when his daughter miraculously survived, his intense scientific mind couldn't just leave it at that. His intellect demanded a rigorous, exhaustive, comparative study of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
To figure out exactly what entity he had just prayed to in that hospital room.
Precisely.
And he ultimately found his answer in the structural, uncompromising logic of the Quran. What specific element of the text caught a surgeon's attention?
For Dr. Brown, it was the theology's absolute rejection of what we call anthropomorphism.
Okay, let's do a quick ELI 5 explain.
Right.
Like I'm 5 for anthropomorphism.
Yeah.
Because that's a big word.
Certainly. Anthropomorphism is when human traits, emotions, or physical forms are attributed to non-human entities, like gods.
Oh, like the Greek gods.
Exactly. In many ancient religions, gods are described as old men with beards sitting in the clouds, or they take the forms of animals, or they have human-like families, jealousies, and physical limitations. Dr. Brown found that the Quran completely lacked this.
Really, none of it.
None. God was described as entirely transcendent, entirely separate from the creation, without any physical, human-like limitations.
So he didn't have to suspend his scientific understanding of biology and physics to believe in a creator, because the creator wasn't described as a biological, physical being sitting somewhere within the universe, subject to gravity and time.
Precisely. Dr. Brown explicitly credited the stringent logical consistency of the text for his transition. He found a theological framework where his intense Ivy League scientific reasoning and his newfound faith could exist symbiotically,
complementing each other rather than being in constant friction. There's another verse the sources highlight that seems tailor-made for this specific demographic of STEM professionals. It's from Surah Al-Mulk, verses 3 and 4, and you should read this one. because the wording is so combative.
The verses state, "He created 7 heavens, one above the other in layers. You will not find any flaw in the creation of the Gracious One. Look again and again. Your sight will turn back to you, weak and defeated."
I mean, I love how aggressive that is. Look again and again.
It is essentially a direct, taunting challenge to the scientific method itself. It explicitly dares the human observer to find structural, mechanical flaws in the fundamental workings of the universe. It demands rigorous observation.
So basically asking for peer review.
Absolutely. For scientists, engineers, and doctors, this verse acts as a bridge between theology and physics. It takes the observable, measurable physical constants of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, the precise tuning of planetary orbits, and entirely shifts the paradigm. Well, what a materialist looks at and calls random, lucky chance, the text recontextualizes as the deliberate, flawless manifestation of divine laws. It frames the laws of physics as the physical sharia, or the divine law of existence.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't religion traditionally pitched as the exact opposite of this?
In what sense?
Well, in the West, religion is almost always sold as a leap of faith. Like, don't ask too many questions, close your eyes, quiet your analytical mind, and just believe because the pastor said so.
That is the common narrative, yes.
It's completely wild to hear that for these highly analytical minds, this specific text is acting more like a rigorous, hostile peer review of their existence.
It is a profound, fundamental departure from how faith is traditionally marketed in the modern West. The Quranic approach to the human intellect is not to subdue it, ignore it, or ask it to be quiet. Its approach is to exhaust it.
To exhaust it. Wow.
Yes. It provides so much logical pressure, so many philosophical trilemmas, that the intellect eventually has no choice but to concede. However, as brilliant as that is, the research clearly shows that intellectual logic is only half of the human experience.
Right, because logic has a massive limit. A perfectly mathematical, flawlessly tuned universe is a great concept for a university classroom, but it offers absolutely zero comfort when you're sitting in a hospital waiting room.
Precisely.
Or when you lose your job, or when you are grieving a profound loss. That's where the purely intellectual approach hits a brick wall. What happens when the text confronts raw, deep, visceral emotional trauma?
This is exactly where we have to look at how this theology handles raw human suffering, which brings us back to Dr. Jeffrey Lang. We mentioned earlier that his youthful atheism was driven by the problem of evil,
right?
A concept theologians call theodicy.
Let's define theodicy really clearly for the listeners. It's the attempt to answer the ultimate paradox. If God is completely good, completely loving, and completely powerful, why is there so much horrific suffering, disease, and cruelty in the world? Like, why do bad things happen to good people?
Exactly. And the sources show how specific verses in the Quran completely and totally reframe this paradox for Dr. Lang and for countless others who come to the text carrying immense trauma. Let's look at Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 216.
Okay, what does it say?
The translation reads, "You may dislike something although it is good for you, or like something although it is bad for you."
Honestly, on the surface, that sounds almost like simple proverbial wisdom, like something your grandmother would tell you when you didn't get the job you wanted.
It does sound simple, but what's fascinating here is that for individuals grappling with severe personal tragedy, crushing poverty, or profound disillusionment, this verse functions as a highly pragmatic framework for cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring.
Yes. It forces the reader to intellectually acknowledge the severe, almost crippling limitations of human perception. We as humans judge events entirely by their immediate emotional or physical impact in the present moment. But we cannot see the ultimate trajectory of our lives. We cannot see the butterfly effect of a hardship.
Right. And the report notes that this concept is almost always paired with another verse from the exact same chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah 286.
Yes, which reads, "God does not burden any soul with more than it can bear."
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you combine those two concepts, that a painful, devastating event might actually be beneficial in a cosmic way that you currently lack the data to perceive, and secondly, that you already possess the exact, precise internal capacity required to survive it.
Right.
You create a highly resilient, almost bulletproof psychological coping mechanism. So many reverts in the source material point to this exact combination of verses as the turning point. Hardship is no longer seen as arbitrary, chaotic, meaningless punishment. Here's an analogy that helped me grasp this. It reframes hardship completely.
Yeah.
It's the difference between thinking you're being tortured in a dark dungeon for no reason versus realizing you're in the middle of a grueling, agonizing workout designed specifically by a master trainer for your personal growth.
That is a powerful way to put it.
Because the physical pain is exactly the same, right? The sweat and the tears are exactly the same. But the meaning of the pain changes entirely. You endure the workout because you trust the trainer's intent.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the psychological shift the text induces. And for Dr. Lang specifically, coming from a strict Catholic background, there was an even deeper, more entrenched theological hurdle regarding human suffering.
What was that?
The concept of inherited or original sin. He struggled deeply with the foundational Christian idea that humanity was inherently flawed and guilty from birth due to the actions of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, right.
And that life on earth was essentially a place of exile, punishment, and inherited guilt.
The sources point to a very specific moment of profound realization for him. He was reading Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 37, which details the Islamic perspective on the immediate aftermath of Adam's fall.
The verse reads, "And Adam received words from his Lord, and he turned to him mercifully, for he is oft returning, ever merciful."
So wait, in the Islamic narrative, there is no original sin that passes down like a genetic disease to the rest of humanity.
None whatsoever. In this theological framework, Adam makes a mistake, he realizes it, he repents using words given to him by God, and he is forgiven immediately, right there on the spot.
Wow. Instantly.
Yes, God reaches out to him in his lowest, most shameful moment. Because the sin is forgiven instantly, there is no generational curse. And crucially, there is no necessity for a future intercessory blood sacrifice to cleanse humanity of this inherited guilt.
Dr. Lang expressed in his writings that this realization offered an unparalleled, overwhelming sense of divine mercy. It permanently resolved his lifelong underlying discomfort with Christian doctrine.
It was a massive paradigm shift for him.
He realized that in the Islamic framework, Earth was never meant to be a punishment for a cosmic mistake. It was always designed from the very beginning to be a deliberate, carefully curated preparatory stage for human spiritual development.
I want you, the listener, to reflect on your own worldview right now. How do you categorize arbitrary hardship in your own life?
Yeah, that's a great question.
When something terrible happens, do you view it as bad luck, a meaningless tragedy, or a cosmic punishment? Consider how this specific textual reframing, the idea that you are not being punished, but rather you are in a curated environment designed for your ultimate development, overseen by a merciful creator who promises he will not break you, might offer immense psychological armor against the relentless chaos of modern life.
That is incredibly powerful. It changes the entire architecture of how you view suffering. And it's this unique combination, the rigorous, unforgiving intellectual trilemmas for the analytical mind, paired with the profound restructuring emotional solace for the traumatized, that makes this text such a potent catalyst.
Absolutely.
But let's shift gears, because this hasn't just captured mathematics professors and surgeons in quiet university halls. This specific paradigm shift has completely upended the lives of some of the world's most visible, highly scrutinized public figures.
Yes, moving into Section 4 of the report, we see how the conversion of celebrity and high-profile figures serves a massive sociological purpose. From a macro perspective, it legitimizes a minority faith in the broader public consciousness.
It definitely does.
And it provides highly visible parasocial role models for everyday people. But when sociologists analyze the actual drivers behind these highly public conversions, a very distinct, fascinating pattern emerges.
What's the pattern?
The quest for absolute, unyielding structure in a world of hyper-commodification.
We'll go through some of these names because the diversity of their backgrounds is wild. It really highlights how this theology appeals across completely different socioeconomic realities.
Yeah.
Take Cat Stevens, the incredibly famous British rock musician from the 1970s. He eventually adopts the name Yusuf Islam. His initial journey was sparked by a near-death drowning experience, but the textual anchor that actually solidified his transition was the opening of Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 1 through 5.
Those verses declare, "This is the book in which there is no doubt, a guide for the righteous." What resonated so deeply with him was the absolute, uncompromising certainty of the text.
Uncompromising certainty.
Right. He also cited Surah Al-As, verses 1 through 3, which emphasizes the fleeting, temporary nature of time. Verily, mankind is in loss, except such as believe and do good works.
Think about where Cat Stevens was sitting when he read that. He was at the absolute pinnacle of the 1970s pop music industry. That environment was the global epicenter of superficial materialism, immense wealth, drug excess, and fleeting fame.
It was a very chaotic world.
Exactly. For a man surrounded by people telling him he was a god, reading a text that bluntly told him his time was running out and his wealth meant nothing unless he did good works, that provided the profound psychological impetus to completely reject that rock star lifestyle.
He sought a life structured around perpetual spiritual consciousness rather than chasing the next platinum record.
Contrast that with arguably the most famous Muslim convert in modern history, Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. His entry point into Islam was entirely different from Cat Stevens.
It really was. Ali's initial conversion in 1964 was deeply, inextricably political. Guided initially by the Nation of Islam, his transition was fundamentally about emancipation from systemic racism and white supremacy in America.
Right. Discarding the name Cassius Clay, which he called his slave name, was a powerful, active reclaiming of his identity.
But what our sources highlight, which is often overlooked in mainstream retrospectives, is that his spiritual journey didn't just stop with that initial political declaration. It matured considerably over his lifetime.
How so?
He eventually transitioned into Orthodox Sunni Islam under the guidance of Warith Muhammad. It shows the incredible fluidity and the deep theological evolution that can happen decades after the initial, highly publicized declaration of faith.
We also see this search for rigid structure in incredibly different modern contexts.
Yeah.
The sources mention Felicia Yape. She was a former Playboy model who had previously explored Buddhism and Christianity looking for meaning.
Yes.
She ultimately stated that Islam offered her true modesty and liberation from the relentless, commodifying male gaze. Adopting the hijab wasn't a restriction for her. It was a deliberate, powerful rejection of her previous career and the industry that profited off her body.
And you see a similar search for structure in the athletic world with figures like Jota Pelotero, a Spanish footballer. For professional athletes navigating post-retirement, the sudden, jarring loss of regimented team structure, daily schedules, and unified purpose can be psychologically devastating.
Oh, I can totally see that.
Yeah.
You go from having every minute planned to nothing.
Precisely. Pelotero observed the strong family structures and unwavering daily discipline of Muslims while in Kuwait, and sought out the faith specifically for its focus on community and rigid daily discipline to replace what he lost when he left the pitch.
It's not just discipline, though. It's also cultural and artistic immersion. Look at Jennifer Grout, an American singer who became incredibly famous on the show Arabs Got Talent.
Her story is fascinating.
She was drawn in almost entirely by the sonic depth of the culture. She immersed herself in Arabic Maqam music and had a profound, visceral, spiritual reaction to the actual auditory recitation of the Quran. She didn't just adopt the faith. She eventually relocated to Morocco to escape Western secularism entirely.
When sociologists look at these disparate narratives, a 1970s rock star, a Playboy model, a retired Spanish footballer, and an American singer, they find a unifying thread.
And what is that?
The theological architecture of Islam. Specifically, the strict, uncompromising regimentation. We are talking about the 5 daily prayers known as Salah, the mandatory month-long fasting psalm, the absolute zero-tolerance abstention from alcohol and gambling.
Right, the absolute boundaries.
In environments characterized by extreme excess, limitless wealth, and a total lack of moral boundaries, this rigid structure acts as an essential, life-saving psychological anchor.
And this brings us to perhaps the most controversial modern example highlighted in our sources. The massive online influencer, Andrew Tate.
Before we delve into the mechanics of this specific example, it is absolutely paramount that we state explicitly, we are taking no sides here.
Absolutely none.
We are taking no sides regarding the political charges, the intense debates surrounding toxic masculinity, or the ongoing legal controversies associated with Andrew Tate. Our role today is strictly to report the sociological drivers noted in the text that explain his highly publicized conversion.
Absolutely. We are looking purely at the mechanics of religious transition as outlined in the academic research. According to the sources, Tate's transition from a secular, hyper-materialist background was framed almost entirely around a search for absolute, uncompromising morality.
The research notes that he expressed a vehement public rejection of Western moral relativism, the idea that truth is subjective and morality changes based on societal trends. He viewed Western society as increasingly degenerate and chaotic, and his conversion was driven by a stated desire for a systemic, patriarchal structure that doesn't bend to modern cultural pressures.
And it's worth noting that his conversion sparked massive, highly polarized, internal debate within Muslim communities themselves.
It certainly did.
But the sociological takeaway is undeniable. Islam is increasingly being viewed by certain disaffected demographics as the ultimate, unyielding countercultural movement against Western hyperliberalism.
Exactly.
So looking at all these high-profile figures, I have to ask a slightly cynical question. And I want the listeners to think about this too.
Go ahead.
Do these highly visible figures convert because the intricate theology uniquely moves them to the core of their being? Or is it because when you have access to limitless earthly excess, when you have millions of dollars, fame, and absolutely zero boundaries telling you no, you desperately need a rigid, uncompromising architecture just to survive your own life?
That is a brilliant sociological question.
Is it truly a search for God? Or is it a desperate search for a boundary so you don't self-destruct?
And the reality, as the data suggests, is that human motivation is rarely singular. It is almost always a profound, messy mixture of both. The theology provides the ultimate, unyielding boundary that their fame and money absolutely cannot corrupt or bribe.
Right. It's the one thing that won't say yes to them.
However, while these personal, emotional, and structural journeys are deeply compelling, the modern conversion movement frequently relies on a totally different, highly effective, yet fiercely debated intellectual weapon to initially draw people in.
Yes, we are moving into Section 5, the scientific miracle narrative. And let me tell you, this is where the academic debate gets incredibly intense.
The scientific miracle narrative, also known in Arabic as Ijaz al-Ilmi, is a modern apologetic approach that asserts the Quran contains advanced scientific and technological data that was entirely unknown and unknowable to a 7th century Arab populace.
And this approach isn't ancient, right?
No, it gained massive geopolitical traction relatively recently in 1976. This was with the publication of a blockbuster book by a French physician named Dr. Maurice Bucaille, titled The Bible, the Quran, and Science. Today, it remains one of the most heavily weaponized and frequently deployed tools in grassroots dawah or global proselytization.
Let's look at the specific verses they use, because if you read them from a modern scientific perspective, they are objectively fascinating. One of the most famous examples used by apologists is Surah At-Tur, verse 40.
Yes.
The verse is using a grand metaphor to describe the dark psychological state of a disbeliever. It says their state is like manifold darkness in a deep sea, covered by billow upon billow, overcast by clouds. When he brings out his hand, he can hardly see it.
Prominent apologists, such as Dr. Gary Miller, have utilized this specific verse with incredible success to convert marine biologists and oceanographers.
Which is wild.
They point to the specific Arabic phrasing translated as billow upon billow or wave upon wave in a deep sea. Modern oceanography, which relies on advanced submersibles and satellite data, confirms the existence of internal ocean waves.
Internal ocean waves, what are those exactly?
There are massive, slow-moving waves that occur deep underwater, entirely beneath the surface waves, created by density stratification between cold and warm water layers.
Wow.
Furthermore, the complete absence of light mentioned in the verse accurately describes the aphotic zones of deep-sea oceanic trenches where sunlight absolutely cannot penetrate.
So the apologetic argument is basically, how could a 7th century man living in a desert environment who had never seen a deep ocean possibly know about internal wave dynamics or the photic zones of deep-sea trenches without direct divine revelation?
Exactly.
Because submersibles didn't exist, scuba gear didn't exist. It's basically like a mic drop moment, for an empiricist.
Exactly, and they use human biology in the exact same way. The sources detail the incredibly heavy reliance on verses describing embryology. Surah Al-Alaq, verse 2, states that God created man from a clinging mass. The original Arabic word used is alaq,
which modern apologists frequently translate as a leech-like clot. Right?
Yes. They argue that this translation corresponds remarkably well, both visually and functionally, with an early-stage human embryo.
How so?
Well, under a microscope, an early embryo looks remarkably similar to a leech, and functionally, it acts as a parasite, clinging and attaching itself to the uterine wall to draw nutrients from the mother.
And they take it even further with another verse, Surah Al-Mu'minun, verse 14, which describes the sequential stages of fetal development.
Right.
It reads, "Then we made the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we made the clot into a lump of flesh, and we made from the lump bones, and we covered the bones with flesh." You present that specific sequence to a first-year medical student, and it sounds exactly like a modern textbook on fetal development.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can immediately see why this methodology is incredibly effective for securing initial conversions, especially among educated Westerners. It provides what feels like incontrovertible, hard empirical proof of divine authorship.
It's very compelling.
It is. However, this exact narrative, the scientific miracle, is currently the site of intense academic friction and severe scholarly pushback from within the Muslim community itself.
Right, because science isn't static. It changes.
Yeah.
Science is constantly updating its theories based on new data.
Exactly. Prominent Muslim academics and theologians like Dr. Sohib Said and Hamza Tsortsis have begun heavily criticizing this over-reliance on scientific miracles. They warn against the profound theological danger of a concept called concordism.
Let's do an ELI 5 for concordism, because this is a vital concept for understanding the fragility of modern faith.
Concordism is the deliberate attempt to force ancient scriptural texts into alignment with modern contemporary scientific theories. It's the act of saying, look, this verse from 1400 years ago perfectly describes the Big Bang Theory, or quantum mechanics, or modern genetics.
Trying to prove an eternal, unchanging spiritual text using a temporary, constantly evolving scientific theory seems incredibly risky.
It is.
It's like trying to validate a beautiful, timeless piece of poetry by running it through a complex math equation. The moment the math changes, which it always does in science, you lose the poetry.
Right.
If the scientific consensus updates tomorrow, does your faith collapse?
That is precisely the danger. And the sources highlight a highly public, highly damaging example of this exact vulnerability.
What happened?
During a major public debate regarding that embryological sequence we just mentioned in Surah 23, verse 14, the verse that says bones are formed and then they are covered with flesh.
Right.
The prominent atheist biologist P.Z. Myers pointed out a fatal biological flaw in the apologetic argument.
Wait, so the traditional translation says bones form first and then flesh wraps around them later, like putting clothes on a skeleton. But what does modern biology actually say?
Modern biology dictates that human bones and flesh actually develop simultaneously from the exact same foundational cellular tissue, known as the mesoderm. They do not develop sequentially, as the traditional translation of the verse heavily implies.
Oh, wow. So the absolute empirical proof that converted thousands of people suddenly contradicted actual modern biology. What happened? How did the apologists react to that?
They were forced to rapidly and somewhat awkwardly pivot. To save the miracle, they had to argue that the Arabic conjunction thumma, which is traditionally translated as then indicating a chronological sequence, can actually also imply simultaneously or furthermore in certain obscure linguistic contexts.
That feels entirely like moving the goalposts. You can't claim it's a perfect scientific description and then change the definition of the words when the science proves you wrong.
Critics argue exactly that. It demonstrates the immense weakness of concordism. You end up performing desperate linguistic gymnastics, forcing the ancient text to fit modern data rather than allowing the text to speak to its original spiritual intent.
That makes a lot of sense.
Furthermore, historical critics point out another major vulnerability. Much of the embryological data presented in the Quran closely mirrors the pre-existing medical fields of the Greek physician Galen.
Wait, who is Galen?
Galen operated and wrote extensively nearly 500 years prior to the Quran's revelation. And he also famously described semen forming an unarticulated lump and flesh growing around bones.
So even if traditional Islamic scholars reject the idea of plagiarism entirely, just the mere historical existence of Galen's texts makes the miracle argument incredibly vulnerable to a basic Google search.
Exactly.
If a new convert builds their entire foundation of faith on the premise that only God could have known this in the 7th century, and then they read a Wikipedia article about Galen, their whole foundation could crack.
Exactly. The foundation is built on sand. And the most egregious example of concordism entirely distorting the original meaning of the text is found in the modern debate over moving mountains.
Yes. This one blew my mind. Surah An-Naml, verse 88. The verse reads, "And you see the mountains, thinking them rigid, while they will pass as the passing of clouds. It is the work of Allah who perfected all things."
Modern evangelists frequently present this specific verse to atheists as a miraculous 7th century description of plate tectonics, continental drift, and the rotation of the Earth.
Like the continents moving.
Yes. The argument is, look, the mountains are moving right now, even though we can't feel it, just like the verse says.
Sounds amazing, right? A perfect scientific miracle. But the text says that is completely contextually false.
It is entirely false contextually. If you perform a rigorous academic analysis of classical Quranic exegesis, which is known as tafsir, such as the highly authoritative, widely accepted work of the 14th century scholar Ibn Kathir, it reveals a completely different reality.
Let's explain what a tafsir is to the listener. These are the classical scholars, the guys who spent their entire lives studying the original linguistic and historical context of these verses hundreds of years ago.
Long before modern science.
Exactly. Long before modern science existed to influence their interpretations.
Precisely. And if you read Ibn Kathir's tafsir, and if you simply read the verse right before it and the verse right after it, it becomes glaringly obvious that they are explicitly dealing with the eschatological events of the Day of Judgment.
So ELI 5, eschatological.
Yeah.
It's an apocalypse verse.
Yes. Eschatology is the theology of the end of the world. Classical scholars universally interpreted the moving of the mountains as a terrifying, catastrophic transformation of the physical world at the end of time, where mountains are literally uprooted and pulverized into dust.
Wow.
It is absolutely not a subtle scientific description of imperceptible geological continental drift occurring in the present day.
That is a massive, almost irresponsible distortion, taking a terrifying spiritual vision of the end of the world and rebranding it as a cool geology fact just to win a debate with an atheist.
Which is exactly why prominent modern Muslim theologians heavily emphasize that the Quran is a book of hidayah, which translates to spiritual guidance. Its primary purpose is to instill moral accountability, awe of the Creator, and ethical behavior.
Right, it's a moral framework.
It is not, and was never intended to be, a textbook of physics, biology, or geology. Treating it as a science textbook artificially forces the text into a box it wasn't designed for and creates a highly fragile, brittle foundation for new believers.
I want to remind you, listening to this, to think about how you consume information in your own life. There's a huge distinction between reading a text to understand how to be a good, moral person versus reading a text to figure out how tectonic plates work. When we confuse the two, we get into trouble.
And what makes this all so volatile is that the intensity of these debates over verses, over concordist science, over correct theology, is no longer confined to academic halls or street corner debates. It has moved entirely onto the screens in our pockets.
Which perfectly transitions us into Section 6, the architecture of modern dawah, or digital proselytization. Because the way people convert today is fundamentally different than it was 20 or even 10 years ago. It's highly sophisticated, it's globalized, and it's entirely driven by algorithms.
The research maps out an incredible, sprawling digital infrastructure. You have massive institutional platforms like the Islamic Education and Research Academy, or IRRA, and yislam.org.
These aren't just like small groups holding signs.
Not at all. These are not small grassroots operations. They operate multimedia campaigns that rival major corporate marketing firms. For example, IRI produces a highly successful series called Muslim Now, which features incredibly high-quality, emotionally resonant, cinematic documentary videos of people converting from diverse backgrounds.
Like who?
Like Khalila Lester coming from a Jewish background, or individuals leaving the music industry, or former atheists.
And it's not just inspirational, tear-jerking videos. They actually provide concrete logistical support. You click a button, and they send you a free translated Quran in the mail. They send new Muslim starter kits.
Yes, the logistical support is massive.
They assign local mentors in your city to help you figure out how to physically perform the prayers or how to navigate halal dietary restrictions at your local grocery store.
Alongside these massive institutions, you have sprawling independent channels. YouTube channels like Muslim Convert Stories, which boasts over 80,000 subscribers, act as vast digital repositories for global testimonies. They showcase everyone from Canadian physicists to Latino gang members to British housewives, all sharing their journey to the faith.
What that does psychologically is amazing. It creates an instant parasocial community. If you are sitting alone in your room in Ohio, deeply thinking about converting but terrified of the social stigma or the reaction of your family, you can go online and instantly watch 100 people who look and sound exactly like you, validating your exact choice.
It drastically reduces the psychological friction of conversion, and for the granular day-to-day realities of living the faith, Personal blogs and social media influencers have become a vital lifeline.
What kind of practical advice are we talking about here?
Well, platforms like the New Muslim blog and Revert deal with everything from theology to the highly practical, like how to budget for a traditional Chinese Muslim wedding or how to deal with a deeply Islamophobic family member at Thanksgiving dinner.
The sources specifically mention the massive digital space carved out for female converts. Blogs like Hotejab and influencers like With Love, Lena blend discussions of modesty, faith, and high fashion. They give women a visual, practical blueprint for how to navigate the very profound, very visible transformation of adopting the hijab in Western corporate spaces without losing their professional identity.
Exactly.
You also have localized minority platforms like LatinoMuslims.com, helping people navigate severe familial pushback in deeply Catholic Hispanic households.
However, while this digital ecosystem is incredibly effective at bringing people in, academic researchers are now heavily flagging severe socio-political gaps and contradictions created by this highly mediatized reality.
Yeah, the concept of hagiography. Let's dive into that because it's the dark side of this digital movement.
Yes. Studies from institutions like the University of Cambridge highlight that the conversion stories published on these massive platforms are frequently subjected to hagiography, meaning they are systematically sanitized, they are idealized.
These smooth over the rough edges?
The messy realities, the crippling doubts, the severe familial trauma, and the cultural friction are often entirely stripped away in the editing room to create a clean, linear, purely inspirational narrative that serves as an effective marketing tool.
The research literally calls it branding piety. It's optimized for algorithmic virality, to get clicks, and to generate philanthropic funding for the channels. It's the highlight reel of conversion.
And this creates a deeply dangerous psychological gap. New Muslims are frequently sold an idealized version of a frictionless spiritual utopia online.
But the reality is different.
Very different. The reality of their conversion almost universally includes profound, paralyzing loneliness. Once the initial high of the conversion video fades, they often experience severe cultural alienation from born Muslims in their local mosques, who might view them with suspicion or treat them as outsiders. And they face a brutal, exhausting learning curve regarding the Arabic language and complex jurisprudence.
So what does this all mean? We have to ask, if digital platforms are heavily editing these conversion stories to maximize clicks and virality, are people falling in love with the actual demanding reality of the religion? Or are they falling in love with a highly produced algorithmic highlight reel?
That is the core vulnerability of digital dawah. When the gritty reality sets in and the established organizations fail to provide long-term, uncommodified pastoral care, many converts experience severe disillusionment.
So people end up leaving.
There are unquantified yet widely acknowledged rates of individuals who quietly leave the faith apostasy shortly after converting. This is a crucial statistic that these glossy YouTube channels almost never publicize.
There's another area where the statistics are incredibly complex and require a much deeper look, and that's the phenomenon of prison conversions. Islam is currently the fastest growing religion within the penal systems of the US, the UK, France, and Australia.
The data is stark and undeniable. In the UK, converts account for roughly 30% of the entire Muslim prison population. In U.S. federal prisons, roughly 80% of all religious conversions behind bars are to Islam. Now, dawah literature and proselytizing organizations often frame these statistics purely as a wave of mass spiritual awakening happening in the darkest places of society.
But sociologists and criminologists who actually study prison dynamics tell a much more nuanced story. They note significant utilitarian and survivalist motivations for taking the Shahada, or the declaration of faith, behind bars. In a highly dangerous, violent, racially segregated prison environment, converting to Islam often secures immediate physical protection by integrating the vulnerable inmate into the highly organized, robust brotherhood networks of Muslim prisoners.
Beyond physical safety, there are tangible, immediate material perks to conversion. In the U.S. and U.K. penal systems, converting can grant inmates access to significantly better food through mandatory halal meals. It grants specific religious accommodations, and crucially, it allows for increased time out of their cells for communal Friday prayers, Jumu'ah, and special communal gatherings during the fasting month of Ramadan.
Now, to be fair, the sources do acknowledge that many of these initial utilitarian, survival-based conversions genuinely mature into lifelong spiritual reform that dramatically lowers recidivism rates once they are released.
That is true.
But ignoring the initial material drivers, acting like a guy, just suddenly saw the theological light when he really just desperately wanted physical protection from a gang and a better meal, that severely skews the demographic data regarding the organic spiritual growth of the faith.
Which brings us to a critical requirement for any rigorous, intellectually honest analysis of religious transition: the counter-narrative. The demographic data is fundamentally incomplete and frankly misleading without acknowledging apostasy and reverse conversions.
Right. Because just as some find profound logical and emotional solace in Islam, others experience the exact opposite trajectory. And the sources provide a highly prominent, deeply complex example that completely contradicts the standard linear dawah narrative. Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Again, enforcing our strict rule of impartiality. We are reporting the sociological and geopolitical drivers of her journey precisely as detailed in the academic text, taking absolutely no political sides.
Of course.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a Somali-born Dutch-American author and activist. Her background was shaped. She was raised under the tenets of the Muslim Brotherhood in Kenya.
But her early life wasn't just strict. It was marked by severe cultural trauma, including surviving female genital mutilation. And the research notes she was deeply, fundamentally impacted by the violence of the 9/11 attacks, which triggered a massive crisis of faith.
That intense trauma, combined with her exposure to Western liberalism, led her to publicly leave Islam. She initially embraced staunch atheism, fiercely championing the secular, empirical works of philosophers like Bertrand Russell. But her ideological shift didn't end with atheism.
No, it didn't.
In a highly publicized move in 2023, she shocked the secular world by announcing her conversion to Christianity.
And her stated reasoning is fascinating because it's not primarily theological, it's geopolitical. She cited the Christian framework not necessarily just for its specific theology regarding Jesus, but as the only credible civilizational bulwark capable of defending Western values against authoritarian regimes, radical Islam, and what she termed modern woke ideology.
Her highly complex trajectory exposes a massive gap in how religious conversion is typically analyzed by theologians. It demonstrates clearly that religious affiliation isn't always about purely objective textual analysis or a logical trilemma or a search for God.
Right, it's so much bigger than that.
It is frequently inextricably linked to geopolitical trauma, sociopolitical alignment, and the desperate human search for psychological and civilizational safety. Her story provides a necessary, gritty counterbalance to the idealized, perfectly linear hagiographic narratives promoted by digital proselytizing organizations.
It shows how incredibly messy and human belief actually is. You have mathematics professors converting to Islam because of a logical trilemma in Surah 52, and you have former Muslims converting to Christianity because they want a geopolitical shield to defend Western civilization.
And that profound complexity brings us to our synthesis. The decision to completely abandon one's heritage religion or to walk away from secular materialism, to embrace a demanding faith like Islam, is a monumental paradigm shift. It requires immense cognitive restructuring and significant social sacrifice.
What we've seen today is how this massive wave of reversions to Islam in the West is occurring at a totally unique historical intersection. You have a 7th century text that relentlessly challenges the intellect with verses like Surah 52's trilemma, daring the reader to find a flaw. And simultaneously, it comforts the deeply traumatized with the immense reframing mercy found in Surah 2. And this ancient, complex text is now colliding with a 21st century digital megaphone. We've seen how specific words have literally rewritten the life trajectories of mathematics professors, heavyweight champions, pop stars, and everyday seekers looking for structure.
The Quran is highly effective as an independent conversion agent because it systematically addresses the human psyche on multiple fronts: the logical, the emotional, the structural. But it no longer operates in a vacuum. The modern convert is heavily influenced, guided, and sometimes misled by the digital ecosystem.
The infrastructure is just so massive now.
The unprecedented availability of high-quality exegesis, combined with the parasocial visibility of role models, makes the daunting prospect of conversion vastly more accessible today than at any point in human history.
But as we've discussed, that modern infrastructure is fraught with immense dangers. The over-reliance on scientifically concordist arguments creates a fragile faith that can be shattered by a single biology textbook. And the algorithmic sanitization of convert stories by dawah platforms risks setting vulnerable people up for a brutal sociological reality check once the cameras turn off and the real work of living the faith begins.
Ultimately, this demographic phenomenon is a testament to the enduring psychological power of ancient scripture when paired with the unprecedented reach of digital media. Recognizing the intricate, deeply human mechanisms driving these conversions, while simultaneously acknowledging the inherent contradictions in how they are reported and marketed, is absolutely essential for understanding how Islam continues to aggressively reshape the spiritual demographics of the 21st century.
It really makes you think about the mechanics of belief in the modern world, which leads me to a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We've talked extensively about how these ancient verses are currently supercharged by digital platforms. But what happens tomorrow? Yeah, what happens when the algorithms themselves become so sophisticated that they begin curating which specific verses you are exposed to first, based entirely on your harvested psychological data?
Oh, wow.
Imagine this. If you've been secretly Googling grief counseling, the algorithm feeds you Surah 2 about divine mercy. If your browser history shows you've been reading physics papers, it feeds you Surah 67 about the flawless mechanics of the universe. In the rapidly approaching future of digital faith, who is the ultimate guide to the truth, the ancient text itself, the parasocial community validating you, or the artificial intelligence algorithm calculating exactly what your soul needs to hear to click subscribe?
That is a profound and genuinely unsettling question about the future of human agency and divine guidance.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring the foundations of your own worldview, and we will catch you next time.